Good morning, everyone. So, as you can see, I got the Dr. Dork headset on, which means that it's time for another tool demo today. Now, today I'm going to talk about two different tools in particular, but the first one I want to talk about is the disc grinder. Now, the disc grinder is a tool that's used quite a bit in the shop for rounding off edges, making things smooth, and just general cleanup of your equipment here. Now you can see here, this grinder in general, this grinder in particular is a two-part grinder. We have not only a belt grinder on one side, but we also have a disc grinder on the other. This is pretty common with most grinders and most sanders. As you can see with another one over here, the wood one we have is both a disc grinder, sorry, a disc sander and a belt sander. And both of these function on one motor, just like you see on our one for metal here. So this one is designed for metal. It has an abrasive belt on it designed for metal, and has an abrasive disc on it designed for metal. Okay. But just know that oftentimes with the disc grinder and the belt grinder, they are oftentimes the same machine. Now, the first thing I want to talk about, as usual, is I want to talk about PPEs with our setups here. First and foremost, you got to have safety glasses. That's a big one. We already know that these things are going to produce a lot of sparks, and if you don't have safety glasses, you don't want any of that stuff in your eyes. Secondly, hearing protection. These things are loud. They are going to make some noise. So you want to make sure you have adequate hearing protection in place. Third, you do want to wear gloves with these things. The metal's going to get hot. There's going to be a lot of hot slag flying all around. Matter of fact, I've got a great story about a student last year whose hand was saved because he was wearing gloves, and as his hand went into this grinder, the gloves actually saved his hands from getting ground down to the grinder. So that's actually a good story about safety from last year. Okay, now the first thing I want to talk about is the machine I want to talk about today is actually the disc grinder. Now, on this machine, it's a two-part machine. We have the belt that goes along the top here, but then we have a disc, an abrasive disc in the front here. The abrasive disc here is what we want to focus on today. Now, the first thing you want to check on your machine is you want to check the quality of the disc itself. You want to make sure that the disc doesn't have any rips or tears or any pieces where there's like bubbling off or it's not completely adhered to the plate on the backside that the disc mounts to. The reason why you want to check for any tears or rips is because this thing spins very, very fast. And if you have one tiny little rip on the side here, then as this thing spins around, it's going to come around, it's going to hit the tool rest, the table here, several thousand times in a minute. And the reason why that's a big deal is because every time that rip comes around and hits the table here, it causes the rip to be a little bit bigger every time. And if that rip is hitting the table over 1,000 times a minute, then you can imagine that rip's going to become real big real quick. That's going to be an issue because as that rip comes around, there's a chance that the ripped piece of material can grab a hold of your material and either cause it to get caught, get flipped up, or even worse, can catch on your fingertips. So you have to be careful and pay attention to your disc here to make sure there's no rips or tears on the disc anywhere. So you have to actually look at your disc surface, your sanding surface here, to make sure it is adhered all the way down and make sure there's no rips or tears on it anywhere. Because if there is, you need to make sure you tell the instructor that the disc is worn so we can replace it. The second thing we need to be aware of is we need to make sure that the tool rest table is only 1/16 of an inch away from the actual grinding surface itself. If the tool rest table is too far away, if the gap here is too big, what can happen is it can actually catch a hold of your material and it can flip it up and it can get sucked down inside between the grinding disc and the table itself. If we have a 1/16 inch gap on this, then that will prevent the material from getting flipped up and sucked down inside there. Also, on that note, we do not grind sheet metal on this machine. The reason we do not grind sheet metal is for two reasons. Number one, actually three reasons. Number one, if we try to grind sheet metal on here, uh, it usually distorts the sheet metal pretty severely. So it can bend it, it doesn't actually grind on it. Two, sheet metal usually isn't very thick, and there's a good chance the sheet metal can actually get caught down inside the gap here. So you can see here how this piece of sheet metal can actually slip in between the tool rest and the grinding disc. You don't want that to happen. So we don't want to grind sheet metal on this thing. And if we do need to clean up sheet metal, we use a file. We don't use this thing because it can ruin our sheet metal. Also, this thing can bend the sheet metal too. Like instead of having this thing grinding on the surface here, it can actually cause the edge here to bend down and get caught in the machine and cause even worse things to happen. Also, the third reason why is sheet metal is usually sharp, and there's a good chance the sheet metal can actually cut the disc and ruin the disc and have to put a new one in. So don't use sheet metal on this machine. It's not designed for sheet metal. It's not meant to use anything. Basically, if your piece of metal can fit down between the tool rest and the abrasive disc, then you can't use it on here. So make sure you pay special attention to make sure that your material is not going to slip down between the tool rest and the material here. Okay. The next big thing I want to mention on this machine, this is directional. Okay. This machine rotates in this direction. This wheel rotates counterclockwise. You always have to sand on the downstroke of the abrasive disc. Okay, so this machine rotates this direction. So I can see that if it rotates this direction, then the wheel goes down into the table on this side. So that means I want to do my grinding on the left half of the wheel. Okay, this is not always the case with all machines. There are machines where the wheel rotates clockwise. Matter of fact, our other disc grinder in the metal shop does rotate clockwise. So you have to make sure that whatever direction the wheel rotates, you are always grinding on the downside of the stroke. So if it's grinding clockwise, you grind on the right side. If it's grinding counterclockwise, you grind on the left side. And the reason why you have to be careful of that is because if you are grinding on the upside, two things can happen. Number one, you're going to spray sparks all over the place. You're going to spray sparks all over equipment, all over everybody else that's all around you, and you're not going to make anybody happy by spraying sparks. You may think it looks really cool to have like a shower of sparks all over the place, but it's not. All it's going to do is piss everybody else off around you. It's going to piss me off because you weren't listening. So that's the first thing that can happen. The second thing that can happen is if you press on this thing too hard, it can actually catch your material and it can actually grab a hold of it and toss it across the shop. And if that happens, it might hit someone. And if that happens, you're going to get in a lot of deep water real quick because if this thing injures someone else due to your unsafe actions, then you're not going to like the consequences that follow because of that. So make sure that when you're grinding, you always grind on the downside of the stroke. On that note, don't try to grind mid-air. Always make sure you have the material resting flat against the table here. Don't hold it upright like this. Don't try to hold it mid-air because if you do, it's just going to get pulled down, and it's going to cause poor quality on your grind, and it's probably going to injure you too. Okay, so make sure that you're always having the material resting against your work or your tool rest here, so that way it's not trying to pull it out of your hand. So don't go on the upside, and make sure you're always going on the downside so the sparks go down and it's resting against the tool rest. Okay. Also, when you're grinding, say you're doing a lot of grinding on one spot, say you want to like grind off the full edge. Don't just sit here and grind in one spot. If you do that, it's going to cause significant wear on the disc in just one location. You need to make sure that as you're grinding, you are working your way across here, back and forth, and not continually grinding in just one spot. If you just continually grind in one spot, it's going to cause premature wear on the disc. It's probably going to cause it to separate, and then we have to replace the disc again. So as you're grinding, make sure you're moving across the grind surface like this, and do not just continually grind in one spot. Make sure that you do go back and forth. Okay. So those are the biggest things you have to be aware of. Another reason why it's nice to wear gloves on this machine, if the disc ever does become loose, there has been situations where the disc abrasive material has grabbed a hold of fingernails, and the last thing you want to have happen is that thing come around, grabs a hold of your fingernail, and it rips your fingernail right off its nail bed. And even though I haven't personally seen this happen, I have heard situations where this has happened. So you do want to wear gloves on this machine because it is going to save your fingers from getting all kinds of bad things happening to them. Okay.